Hey everyone, it's Rob, and I hope you guys had a great holiday. I know I did. Did a lot of relaxing, a lot of music stuff, played a lot of games, and obviously spent time with family. Been spending quite a bit of time playing through the Resident Evil series in particular, so that's been a lot of fun. It's my first time through it, but anyways, getting off track there a little bit, I kind of want to talk today about perhaps the most useful chord or the set of chords that you could ever know as someone who writes music, especially if you want to modulate. And what modulation is it basically just means you're changing keys. Um, so what are these chords? These chords are fully diminished chords, and they're a little different than your standard diminished chords, which I'm going to explain in just a second. But usually, overall, people think of diminished chords as not very good, so they don't sound very good on their own, or they're kind of like bad chords, and they just don't really mesh well. Most of the time, when you use diminished chords, you're either trying to kind of create some sort of tension, because they're very good at that, because they are kind of off-putting a little bit. But these chords are incredibly useful when it comes to modulation, and they honestly might be some of the most important chords that you could use when writing. And I'll explain kind of how it all works once we go through and kind of explain the differences between the diminished chords, and kind of there's a bunch of different stuff that we can go through. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Before I get into actually showing you exactly how we can use diminished chords to modulate, I kind of need to lay out some kind of explanations or kind of show the differences between the two different types of diminished chords, and kind of like the differences between them. And that'll make sense in just a second. But starting from the top here, I have this scale written. This is C minor, and in a minor key, the second is the diminished note or the diminished chord. In a major key, it's going to be the seventh. If this notation doesn't make sense, I have a video kind of explaining what chord progressions are and kind of how this stuff is created and how we get this. I'll link that in the description, but for now, let's just focus on the diminished chords themselves. So your basic triad, your D diminished triad here, is D, F, A flat. And the reason why this is diminished is because there's from D to F is a minor third, and then from F to A flat is also a minor third. So two minor thirds stacked on top of each other creates a diminished chord or a diminished triad. And what a minor third means is that from D to F is three half steps. So basically it's three notes here from D to F, and then from F to A flat is another three notes or three half steps. When we do the seventh and add the seventh to this triad, we then get D diminished 7, and that is D, F, A flat, C, and this is half diminished. And you might be wondering, okay, what is this distinction here? Why does this mean half diminished? Well, the other diminished chord is full diminished, and this might make more sense after I'm done explaining this, but essentially for a half diminished chord, you have your standard triad, which is two minor thirds, but then you have a major third between A flat to C. Can you guess what a full diminished chord is? If you guess that you have three minor thirds, then you would be correct. So if we come down here, this chord does not naturally occur in C minor, at least like not all these notes are part of C minor, so this is going to sound a little crunchier when it's played, but this is what a full diminished chord actually is. It is three minor thirds stacked on top of each other. So from D to F is a minor third, F to A flat is a minor third, A flat to C flat is a minor third. And the reason why I didn't do B is because I want to kind of notate that it's this note flattened. So in some scenarios, and one of the diminished chords, the full diminished chords, you're actually going to have a double flat, and I'll explain that when we get to that. But when you notate this, if you're using like a scale like this, you wouldn't want to use B, because that kind of it kind of makes it confusing of, okay, is this the seventh that's being raised, or is it the first that's coming down? So you typically want to write the notes for what you're kind of notating here. So the seventh here is just being flattened, and that's essentially what's happening. Now, kind of explaining the thirds and major third thing that I was talking about, if you just count the notes between, the notes between each interval here, from D to F, you have 1, 2, 3. That's a minor third. From F to A flat, that is also a minor third. So 1, 2, 3. And then going to B, 1, 2, 3. So that's your full diminished chord. And then your half diminished chord is, you have the 4 here. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the difference between half diminished and full diminished. Hopefully that makes sense. The half diminished chords are, again, really good at causing, using suspension or adding suspension, kind of adding some grittiness to whatever you're writing. Same thing with the triads. And again, you can use anything to modulate, but there's a secret magic formula for the reason why this in particular is going to be super helpful. And we can get into that now. So essentially, if we write out, there's only going to be 3 fully diminished chords. And there's a reason for this, and I'll explain this. But so the first is C, E flat, G flat, and then B, again, double flat. This is kind of where I brought this up. It's just the way that it's notated. So instead of writing A, you would write B double flat. And then you have C sharp, E, G, B flat, and then D, F, A flat, C flat. Again, so these are just starting kind of off-kiltered. And you might be wondering, okay, why are there only these 3? Well, because if you take a look at this and actually look at the piano here, this is a perfectly like circular chord. So your next note from A here is C, or B double flat. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and it just keeps rotating over and over. So if you wanted to use E flat as the bass, what you wouldn't write E flat here. You would just do the inversion of this chord. So there's really only 3 fully diminished chords that you can play. Hopefully that makes sense. If that doesn't, you can go ahead and ask questions below. But essentially what you're doing is you're just putting this note in the bass and you're shifting these notes around, and then that is your chord. So that's what I mean by inversion. So this wouldn't be its own separate thing or like a brand new chord. It's just an inversion of the first one. And that's kind of how that all works. So there's only 3 fully diminished chords, and these are perfectly circular chords. So like any inversion of, like, these are the only 3 variants that you really honestly have, and you can use these to modulate to literally any key. And that's kind of the super magic thing about these chords, is when you play these, you can go from C minor all the way to like F sharp minor, which I have an example of, and it's not going to sound weird, because normally when you modulate, there's a few different ways that you can do it. You can either just straight up jump into a new key, and it's normally very jarring, especially if the key is way different or has like a ton of different notes. And what that means is, like, you play like a C minor note, or you play like the 5th, and you just completely swap keys on the fly, and it sounds super weird. And sometimes that's what you're going for, and that's totally cool. But if you want to transition smoothly, normally what you would do is you would have similar chords that are shared between the different keys, and you would kind of slowly work your way into that key, or kind of like morph your way into it, and like the listener doesn't even realize that you've modulated. Um, but that would become tedious if you're going from something like C minor to F sharp minor, where the notes are so different. It would take you a long time to get there. But using these chords, there's a special way that we can change keys very quickly, and it doesn't sound super jarring. It's really really cool, and that's kind of what we're gonna jump into next. Okay, so I have a couple examples here of modulating from C minor into E flat minor and C minor into F sharp minor. And going from C minor to E flat minor is kind of, it's like a half jump, I would say. It's not a huge massive jump, but it's a pretty good jump. Going from C minor to F sharp minor is like the biggest jump you could possibly do, and making this sound in just a couple bars, making it sound natural would be very difficult to do without using these full diminished chords. And let's kind of talk about how we can do this. So what is the trick to using the full diminished chords? So whatever key that you want to go to, so let's say I'm going to E flat minor, what you do is, and essentially the reason why I picked E flat minor is because D is here, and so this is going to make it super simple. So this is already basically part of C minor, so this is going to sound really easy to just jump right into E flat minor. But the trick to using full diminished chords is whatever key that you want to go to, the root or the bass note of the diminished chord should be the leading tone of that key. So what does that mean? So if I want to go to E flat, I should choose the note directly before E flat as the root note of that diminished, of the full diminished chord, and that would be D. So going from D to E flat, that is the trick there, because this, what you're going to do is you're going to push this, it's gonna resolve. That's what you're doing, is you're resolving this D to E flat, and it sounds nice when that happens. So that's kind of the trick with the full diminished chords, and it's going to be a little different here when we get down here, and I'll explain that in just a second. But for now, let's listen to how smooth this transition is, and it's going to sound a little weird because I start with the half diminished chord to kind of like set up the full diminished chord, and essentially what I'm doing is I'm just kind of getting the ear ready to transition with this half diminished chord, which is just it's the actual chord from C minor, and then what I'm doing is I'm flattening the seventh, and then I'm pushing directly into E flat minor, and then from there the rest of this is just the same as up here, just in E flat minor. So this should sound smooth, and this, again, this is a pretty relatively large jump. It's not a super crazy jump, but it should sound smooth, especially around here. So this is what it sounds like. Okay, so that is the first example, and again, this is the trick. So whatever you want to go to, you want to have this tone, this leading tone, pushing into the next key. So it's just the note before pushing up. Okay, so now what if we wanted to go from C minor to F sharp minor? And this is going to be where you kind of have to add an additional chord here. But the cool thing is, essentially, again, what you're doing is you want to make sure this leading tone is being pushed up into the next key. So for F sharp minor, you want to have F as the root of the last full diminished chord. And you can kind of get away with this by rotating through these chords. If you start with, so this is the D diminished chord. If I push this up and just go and just play the diminished chord again, but just rotate it up, then put F at the bottom here, this is all you need in order to rotate to a completely different scale, or a completely different key, which is super cool. So again, this should sound relatively smooth doing this. And then the chord here, so this is in F sharp minor. You just have to resolve the notes properly. So F goes up to F. And again, this looks kind of weird but this is a completely different key. So the key change here, these notes all change. So that's why this is actually F going to F sharp. And then the reason why I have the C here is because this is the odd one out. So without having the C here, it sounds a little rough. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm going from C flat, oh wait, not C flat, C flat. Oh yeah, C double flat to kind of a C sharp, which is a little weird, but the only reason why this note is here is to help this one kind of resolve a bit, and it sounds easier. So don't mind that, but essentially what you need to do again is just keep this in mind, that you're going up from this F to this F sharp, and then you can play around with these notes to make it sound as good as you want, or like resolving the rest of these notes so that way it sounds good. But this should sound smooth, and this is what it sounds like. So there you have it. That is kind of how you can use fully diminished chords to rotate between or modulate to any key. It's really, really cool, and these chords are super, super helpful. And again, you can go from any key to any key just as long as you're using this leading tone here and pushing into the next key, and you can just rotate through these fully diminished chords to kind of get to that point of where you need to be. Yeah, it's just super, super helpful. But I hope that made sense and you liked the examples. And other than that, I'm gonna wrap it up. So I hope you learned something today. If you didn't know about full diminished chords or half diminished chords and kind of what the difference was and kind of how you use them. But if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down below. And yeah, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.